Now we're going to talk about the three most common defenses to a lawsuit for negligence. And the three most common defenses are assumption of the risk, superseding cause, and a contributory or comparative negligence. And while we're doing this, we will also talk about two other principles of negligence lawsuits. That is the danger invites rescue doctrine and the thin skull rule. So that's where we're going, and to cover all those things, we set up a hypothetical. Now suppose that I'm a homeowner and my septic system has gone bad, and unfortunately, because the drainage is bad in my backyard, I'm one of those rare homeowners that has a septic system in their front yard. And it just so happens that my septic tank is right out in my front yard near the sidewalk. And so my septic system fails, and I'm too cheap to hire a guy to come out with a backhoe and dig up the old septic tank. And so I'm out there with a shovel, and I start digging early in the morning, and I dig and I dig and I dig and I dig a hole that's 10 feet wide and 10 feet long, and it's about 12 feet deep. And by the end of the day, I'm so totally exhausted, I just drop my shovel and I go in the house and collapse. I don't rope it off with any warning tape. I don't put a fence around it. I leave this 12-foot deep, 10-foot by 10-foot hole right next to the sidewalk out in front of my house. Rather careless. Well, a little old lady who's walking her dog that evening, and it's already getting dark, and the dog pulls on the leash a little bit, and the little old lady falls into this 12-foot deep hole, and she breaks her hip. And she's laying down there in the bottom of the hole yelling, help me, I've fallen and I can't get up." So, not funny, but kind of sadly funny in a different way. And so she's laying down there in the hole. Obviously, I am liable to her in a lawsuit for injury because I left a major hazard on my property near a place where people were going to be walking near the sidewalk, and I failed to rope it off or fence it off or put up any warning. So I'm liable to the little old lady. That's kind of a no-brainer. But the next thing that happens is brave young Tom. Usually I pick some studly, handsome, buff guy in the class to be brave young Tom. Brave young Tom is walking down the sidewalk, and he hears this little old lady calling, help me, I've fallen and I can't get up. And he decides, oh, I've got to go rescue the little old lady. And so he sees her down there. So he starts climbing down the sides of this steep 10-foot deep hole that I have dug there, climbing down there to rescue her. But he slips going down the wall, and he falls also on top of her, causing further injury to the poor little old lady and also breaking his leg. And so now he's laying down there also. And the legal question is, am I liable to brave young Tom for his injuries? Because, there is this principle in the law that says if you see the danger and you choose to go into the danger anyway, that is called assumption of the risk. And when you choose to go in there, knowing the danger is there, you have the last clear chance to avoid the injury. And so if you get injured then, the property owner is not liable. So under the assumption of risk doctrine, I would not be liable for Tom's injuries, except that he only assumed the risk to rescue the little old lady. And there is another legal principle called danger invites rescue. And if I create the danger that causes the injury to the little old lady, that causes Tom to go down there to rescue her, then if Tom gets injured also in the attempt of the rescue, I am liable to him for his injuries also under the danger invites rescue doctrine. But there is a defense called assumption of risk, and if he had been going down there for other reasons, not to rescue someone, I would not be liable for his injuries. So let's look at that. The next person who comes along is George, and he is an adult. He's not a kid, but he's one of these adults that loves to ride the BMX bicycles, and he does tricks. He spins them around on the back wheel, and he balances on the seat standing up, and He does all kinds of stunts and tricks on a BMX bike, and he's riding his bike along. He sees the hole. He doesn't hear the old lady in the bottom of the hole or George moaning and groaning in pain. He just sees the hole, and he notices that while I was digging the hole, I piled all the dirt up on one side of the hole, and there's a big dirt berm there. And he says, wow, if I back my bike up about 50 feet and I pedal as fast as I can and I hit that dirt berm, it'll be like a launch ramp, and I bet I can jump clear across that 10-foot hole. So George backs his bike up and he starts pedaling as fast as he can go, and he hits that dirt berm and he goes airborne, and he almost but not quite makes it across. Bam! He hits the opposite wall of the 10-foot hole, falls down into the hole on top of Brave Tom and the poor little old lady, causing both of them more injuries, and he's injured too. And the question is, am I liable then to George, the guy who saw the hazard, did not go down there trying to rescue someone, but chose to assume the risk? And under the assumption of risk doctrine, no, I am not liable to the injuries for George. George, your injuries are on you. You're going to have to pay for those. Okay, so we're going to change the scenario with the 10-foot hole one more time. And we're going to have a different little old lady walking by on the sidewalk. And here's what happened. Being a fat old lawyer, I went out there and started to dig the hole. But I didn't get it 10 foot deep. I was so out of shape. About all I did was I managed to get off the top layer of sod. And so I have a little drop off of the sidewalk, which is maybe 2 or 3 inches high. And then it's just bare dirt. And there's no hole there at all. There's just the sod peeled back, and there's a drop off of the sidewalk of 2 or 3 inches. And the little old lady is walking in the evening time, walking her dog, and the dog pulls on the leash, and she slips a little bit off the sidewalk. She doesn't fall down because there's no big hole there, but she steps off the sidewalk on the little 3-inch drop, and any other ordinary person would not have been hurt at all, would not have fallen down at all. But because this little old lady has very fragile bones, when she steps down off of the sidewalk, she breaks her ankle in 3 places and has serious medical bills, and she sues for my negligence in leaving this little bit of sod peel off near the sidewalk. The question is, if no other ordinary person would have been injured by the danger that I created, should I have to pay the little old lady's damages just because she's more vulnerable than the average person and her fragile bones caused her to get hurt? And the answer is yes. If I created the hazard, then I have to pay the damages for the little old lady too, even though her injuries are only because she has fragile bones. And the legal case, it's another ancient legal case from way back that established this rule of law, is called the thin skull case, and to this very day this is the thin skull rule. And some of you are going to think I'm making this up because it's so bizarre, but this is a real case. The truth is sometimes stranger than fiction. But what we had in the thin skull case was we had a bookstore, and the books were piled up to the ceiling on shelves all over the store, and there was even a little bookshelf over the top of the doorway where you entered the store. And over the years, people going in and out and opening and closing that door, some of the books on the shelf over the door began to vibrate outward. And finally, a guy came in through the front door, and he shut that door, and when he did, a book fell from the shelf over the doorway onto the top of his head. Now, it wasn't a giant, heavy book. It was an ordinary book, and it only fell about 10 or 12 inches from the shelf right above the door till it hit his head. But this particular man, anybody else, the book would have bounced off their head, there would have been no harm, everybody would have had a laugh, and that would have been it. But this particular man had a genetic defect, and he had a paper-thin skull. And when that book fell and hit him on top of the head, it crushed his skull and killed him. And so his family was suing the bookstore, and the bookstore owner said, hey, wait a minute, it's no fair to hold me liable for this guy's death just because he has a weird aberration. He has this paper-thin skull. That's not my fault. So why should I have to pay? And the court said, look, if you create the danger, then it doesn't matter how vulnerable or how weak or how strong the person is who gets hurt. You're responsible for whatever injury is created by the danger that you created. You created the danger by having the bookshelf above the doorway where you knew books might fall off someday and hit somebody. And so the fact that they hit this guy who had a paper-thin skull doesn't make any difference. Whatever his damages are, you have to pay. So the bookstore owner had to pay for the wrongful death of the guy with the thin skull, and to this very day, that's the thin skull rule. So what else have we got to cover? Oh, we've got to cover a superseding cause, and I have a fun hypothetical on this. Maybe it's not funny to you, but it's funny in class because we have 6 senses of humor, you know. So what happens is I have a pickup truck, and I have big side mirrors, rear view mirrors that stick out on the side because sometimes I pull a trailer. And so I'm driving down the road in my pickup truck, and I get a cell phone call, and so I'm distracted with my cell phone for a minute, and my truck swerves a little bit off to the side. Well, you happen to be riding a bicycle down the side of the road. Bam! My rearview mirror hits you right in the middle of the back, and it sends you flying out into the field about 50 feet, and when you hit the ground, you have a broken shoulder, and you are laying on the ground in pain. And I say, oh, I run out there, I stop the truck, I run out there, I say, oh, that's my dog shaking off. I run out there and I say, I'm so sorry, it's my fault. I'll run back to the car. I dropped my cell phone. I'll run back to the car and call an ambulance. So I run back to the ambulance, to the truck, to get my cell phone to call the ambulance. Obviously, I'm liable for your injury caused by me hitting you with the truck. But in the meantime, you're just having a really bad day, and overhead is flying one of Branson's airliners, and you know he's going broke lately because of the pandemic, and he hasn't spent the proper amount of money doing maintenance on his airliner, and the engine explodes, and a giant piece of sheet metal from the exploding airliner falls thousands of feet to the ground, and it chops off your legs. And so the question is, am I liable for the loss of your legs? I'm the one that hit you with the truck, and I'm liable for your broken shoulder, but am I liable for the injury, the loss of your legs that was caused by the poorly maintained airliner? Arguably not. Arguably, that was a superseding cause of injury that injured your legs. It wasn't caused by my negligence, it was caused by somebody else's negligence, and you can make them pay, but not me. So that's the third defense, or I'm sorry, that's the second defense, which is superseding cause. First defense is assumption of the risk. Second defense is superseding cause. And the third one is where millions of dollars are won and lost in injury lawsuits, and that is contributory negligence or comparative negligence.